Hi, everybody. I'm Pastor Clark from St. Paul Lutheran Church. You know, I love the book of Acts of the Apostles. It shows what radical lives the gospel and the Spirit of Jesus empowered the apostles to live. And it shows the reasons why others opposed them. And those reasons seem shockingly relevant to this here and now. Acts 16 tells about Paul, the apostle, and his partner Silas. They met a young girl who was enslaved to both humans and an unclean spirit. When Paul cast out the spirit, the human slaveholders revealed their values: profit over people. Quotation now, but when her owners saw that their hope of making money was gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace before the authorities. They said, "These men are disturbing our city." End quote. Then Paul and Silas were beaten badly and thrown into prison. But, so was Jesus. Quote, about midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. Suddenly there was an earthquake so powerful that the foundations of the prison were shaken, and immediately all the doors were opened and everyone's chains were unfastened. End quote. The resurrection earthquake, the power of Pentecost. You have cast the mighty down from their thrones. We sing during Holden evening prayer services, echoing Mary's song in Luke 1. Here, God cast those slaveholders and their marketplace authorities down by decisively liberating the prisoners, and not through revenge. The story didn't end here, though, because Paul and Silas made no escape. No, all the prisoners stayed put. Shaken awake, the jailer assumed that the prisoners escaped and immediately became terrified. Terrified of those slaveholders and their enabling authorities, of the humiliation and brutality that they would certainly unleash on him for his failure. He gets ready to kill himself rather than face them. And just then, Paul and Silas interrupt. They tell him of a Lord of love and mercy, so unlike the slaveholders and their prisons. The jailer immediately trusts in this Lord, and immediately he and his whole household are baptized. Liberated as well. No one was free until everyone was free. I mean, what a marvelous story. Written, of course, to help us find God and God's way in our world. Here's what I take away. 1. God's bottom line is human liberation, not profit or business as usual. 2. As you liberate people too, you may be accused of disturbing our city or turning the world upside down. Don't be afraid. 3. Violence is weakness. So is the need to control. God's weakness is God's self-giving love for people, and it is the only real strength in the universe. 4. Who was captive? The young girl, the prisoners, the jailer, the slaveholders, and the authority. God intends to liberate everyone from slavery, punishment, and violence. And 5. Our foundations are due for some shaking. Maybe they already are. Now, I don't know about you, but I so identify with the jailer. The people disturbing our cities now remind me of how the Lord of love shook the foundations for me. woke me up to racism and gave me a choice to live for the one true God and serve those slaveholders no more. I mean, make no mistake, racism is a power grab. It's about plunder, not about hate. Bianca Vasquez and Ta-Nehisi Coates woke me up to this. People with wealth, social status, and power invented the lie of race. They used it to maintain and expand their dominance, and they still do. The origins of race and slavery in America show this clearly. So some history by way of Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow. So the elites of early colonial America were the so-called planter class of European immigrants. Their tobacco plantations were the source and symbol of their wealth, power, and status. They needed land and cheap labor. Native Americans lived on the land that the planter class wanted. Jealousy for that land and for more wealth and power led to the lie of the so-called civilized white man and quote-unquote red savages. They planted the lie in the Bible. Red Canaanites, they said. And they put that lie into the mouth of God. Then that lie justified plunder and genocide. Now, for cheap labor, the planter class used indentured servants, a kind of temporary slaves. And at first, indentured people were both European and African. Poor Europeans who sold themselves for a chance at a better life, and African captives. But then European and African indentured servants united in an uprising against the planter class. It failed, but alarmed, the planter class adopted a divide and conquer strategy to protect their wealth and power. And based on the lie of white superiority and black inferiority, they bribed poor Europeans with special privileges. They planted the lie in the Bible, the curse of Ham, and they put that lie in the mouth of God. Then that lie justified slavery and plunder. The lie was written into the Constitution of the United States of America. The first presidents were members of the planter class, slaveholders. And according to USA Today, George Washington was the wealthiest president ever until Donald Trump was elected. Now, some might say this is revisionist history. It really is. I mean, the Acts of the Apostles, that book in the Bible, shows how the first apostles revised their history that they thought that they knew. They told the old stories of Abraham, Sarah, and Moses. They knew they had to be told anew because of Jesus. Now, William Sloane Coffin, a pastor and a peace activist, said this: "There are 3 kinds of patriots, 2 bad, 1 good. The bad ones are the uncritical lovers and the loveless critics. Good patriots carry on a lover's quarrel with their country, a reflection of God's lover's quarrel with the world." Now, this history of the United States is core to my own lover's quarrel with this country. This history also sheds light on racism's weakness and suggests a way forward. 1. Since racism is a tool for stealing money and power, we may dismantle racism by restoring money, and power to those who are being robbed. 2. Those being robbed includes, first and foremost, black people and all people of color other than white. And it includes white people. White people are also being robbed. And the way to liberty and justice for all is to right racial and economic wrongs at the same time. Otherwise, that old divide and conquer strategy will get the better of us again. The struggle against racism is a struggle against classism. It always has been. 3. A quotation. After the South lost the Civil War, slavery was abolished, but slaveholder religion never went away. End quote. This says preacher and author Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove. He continues that slaveholder religion never repented, and it is with us still. End quote. We get to repent, reread, reimagine, and move beyond. Now, I say all of this not to convince, but because I myself am convicted. It's taken me my whole life so far to unlearn the quote-unquote history and to lose my quote-unquote religion and to let the truth set me free. George Floyd and so many more have died in the meantime. Quote, "But if I build up again the very things that I once tore down, then I demonstrate that I am a transgressor." End quote. Paul in Galatians 2:18. Quote, "If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them." End quote. Jesus, John 13:17. And quote, "It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth." Abraham Lincoln, Gettysburg Address. Thanks be to God.